So when it comes to summertime bass fishing, there's very few staples out there that people know and that people fish every single day. But one of those staples is a ribbon-tailed worm. It's kind of fallen off the face of the earth with forward-facing sonar, but it still very much catches fish and is a bait that I always have on my deck and that you should have on your deck when it comes to this time of year and early fall. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna break down how to fish a ribbon-tailed worm, my 3 favorite ribbon-tailed worms at the end of this video, and what you can do to fish a ribbon-tailed worm to get more bites on it right now. So stick around, you guys don't want to miss this video. So when it comes to offshore fishing, a ribbon-tailed worm is probably just as old as bass fishing itself. It sticks around no matter what for catching fish on those offshore ledges and offshore brush piles. And even today with forward-facing sonar, there's still a ton of guys that throw a big ribbon-tailed worm. But there's more sizes than just one size ribbon-tailed worms, and there's more ways to fish it than just one. So that's what we're gonna focus on today, is some of my favorite ribbon-tailed worms and how I like to fish them on the given conditions that we have today. So as far as ribbon-tailed worms go, one of the best ones out there, and probably one of the only ones that I fish as of right now, is that Zoom, I don't even know what this one is. This is just a Zoom Super Salt Plus Mag 2 ribbon-tailed worm. So this is just in that June bug color because we have some really off-color water right now. And so when I'm fishing a worm offshore, I don't like to peg my weight when I'm fishing it on a Texas rig, because if you peg your weight, then a lot of times it doesn't get the same action it would as if you don't have it pegged. So when you hop it, that weight will drop back down and then your worm's just kind of floating down. So that gives me a lot better options to catch those fish and gives them differences in how you move it. And so all I'm doing is Texas rigging that worm like so, just like that. And now we're going to talk about the different ways that I like to fish a worm offshore. So let's talk about the gear for a minute that I'm throwing on my Texas rigged worms, whether I'm fishing offshore, whether I'm fishing brush piles, because there's a couple different rods and reels that I really like to have geared up for that. So in this video, you'll notice I'm fishing an Arc Invoker Limited Series, which is a 7-foot 2-inch medium heavy fast action rod. It's kind of my go-between all around my lighter rod. I throw finesse jigs with it, I will throw a little bit of lighter offshore jigs with it, and I will also throw my medium ribbon tails on, say, 1/2 ounce and lighter tungsten weight rigs. So if I'm fishing a Texas rig in some shallower brush, I'm fishing smaller worms, this is going to be my go-to rod. And I pair that with an Arc G5 8 1-to-1 gear ratio reel because it allows me to pick up line fast. And on this particular lake, I wasn't concerned about catching anything over 4 pounds. They had recently filled the lake and I knew that the fish hadn't gotten that big yet, but there was a lot of fish. So I knew I was going to catch a lot of that 1.5 to 2.5 pound range. So I was only throwing 14-pound tests. So I wasn't overdoing it with that 7.2 medium heavy fast. Now, if I'm fishing on a lake where I know I have shot at big fish, I'm fishing in brush piles where I'm really trying to get those fish out, I'm gonna go with a 7-foot 3-inch mag medium heavy or a 7.6 heavy rod to get those fish out of there. And then what I'm also going to do when I'm fishing those deeper piles is I'm going to fish a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel because that's going to give me more torque and more leverage to get those fish out of those brush piles, and I'll pair it up with somewhere around 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon, so that way it gives me a little bit of buffer if those fish get wrapped up on anything or just being able to pull those fish out of there. And so it's really important to match the gear with what you're coming across. If you're in a lake and you're saying, man, I don't have a shot at big fish, the biggest fish I might catch is 4 pounds, and you're going to be throwing that 6 to 10-inch ribbon tail worm on lighter weights, go with that 7.2 medium heavy. But if you're on a lake where you're like, I'm going to be throwing 1/2 ounce and heavier weights, going for big fish and big brush piles, fish and grass, that kind of thing, then go with that mag medium heavy or that 7.6 heavy. And again, I will have all of those linked down below so you guys can get a hold of those, as well as I will have the ribbon tail worms and some of my other favorite worms linked down below as well. So when I'm fishing a worm, the first way that I will fish a worm is I will cast it out and I will simply drag it back. Hopefully you guys can see me all right there. And so I'm letting that bait hit the bottom and I'm doing a slow pull. Because that ribbon tail has that ribbon tail, that worm will actually be down there and that tail will just be moving through there. And so if those fish have seen a lot of baits, sometimes just dragging it nice and slow like that really gets a lot of attention from those fish, even though you wouldn't think it should, because it doesn't really have a ton of action. But this time of year in the summertime, that lack of action actually helps you catch more fish. Now the other way that you can fish a worm is almost like how you would fish a jig offshore. So again, I'll cast it out, let it hit the bottom, and then what I'll do is I'll hop it. and I'll just let it fall back down to the bottom, hop it again, and that paired with that Texas rig that's not pegged gets that bait to curl up real fast, but then that weight will fall down before the bait does, and so then the worm kind of slowly falls and curls its way back down. So the third way that you can fish a ribbon tail worm is actually kind of one that people overlook a lot, is if you increase the size of your weight on the bottom, you can actually just do a slow reel. Because it has that ribbon tail on the back, that tail will be back there just curling, and if you're trying to figure out where those fish are at on the bottom, if you put a heavier weight on to keep it on the bottom, you can just reel it to cover more water to figure out where they're at, and then change up your retrieve once you figure out where they're at. This also works if you're fishing shallow and grass, if you're fishing, you know, shallow flats. Because that ribbon tail has all that action, you can actually reel it and get a lot of action similar to how a swim bait is fished. So as promised, let's talk about my 3 favorite worms when it comes to Texas rigging offshore worms, because there's 3 that I really like and 3 that I use for kind of different situations. The first go-to is going to be that ribbon tail worm that you saw me throwing today in the video, and that is just that Zoom medium-sized ribbon tail worm. Basically, it's like a 6 to 8 inch ribbon tail worm, and that June bug is one of my go-to colors. And I'll have it linked down below along with a few other colors and some gear that I like to throw it on. But this is just a workhorse. You can fish it all over the place. This is a good go-to. If you don't know which worm to throw, that's the one I'm going to go with. Has great action in the tail, falls super, super nice, and is a really soft worm that those fish will eat and hold on to. There's a little bit of scent in there as well that kind of draws those fish in. But whether you're hopping it, dragging it, or swimming it, that's my go-to. Now the next worm that I like is that it's another Zoom worm. It's a Zoom Z-craw worm. And so it has the Z-craw tail on it, which makes it great for slow dragging it because it has great kicking action back there. And so if I want to get more aggressive with the worm, this is going to be the one that I go with. I like to fish this one in grass where I'm hopping it more because it slows the fall rate down with those 2 kicker tails on there. It's a great worm for if I'm fishing around a group of fish and I want to get one fired up, because as you rip it, it gives off a lot of vibration with those tails, and then it falls super, super slow, which lets the Texas rig weight fall down a lot faster. So this worm falls immensely slower than any of the other worms on the list. So the last offshore worm that I like to throw is when fishing gets really tough and fish don't want hardly any action. I like to go to that Z-Man Mag Fatties. It's just a great long straight tail style worm, same in that June bug style color that gets bit when those fish are being really finicky. This is going to be my slow drag worm. This is going to be the one that I'm going to do my cleanup crew with to see if I can't get any of the finicky fish that didn't want any of the action, that are just kind of down there. That's what I'm going to pick up and throw. I throw it on all the same gear, which will all be linked down below. But if those fish get fired up, you catch them on a few worms and you want to see if they'll eat something a little bit less intrusive, a little bit less obvious, that's going to be the worm I go to. So one thing that I want to talk about in our Bible verse of the day isn't actually a Bible verse. It's something that they talk about over and over and over again in the Bible. And it's any of the followers of Jesus, any of his disciples. One thing that you notice is they were chasing something of their own, right? Whether they were fishermen, whether they were tax collectors, it didn't matter. They all had their own earthly will, right? They wanted to chase something, and that was what their goal was. But then whenever they met Jesus and they started following Jesus, they abandoned all of it to follow Jesus and to do his work. They didn't care about how much money they were going to make. They didn't care about where they were going to sleep. Well, I mean, they did care about where they were going to sleep, but it wasn't a priority to them. They were just following Jesus no matter where he went and no matter when. And that's what they did, because they knew no matter what they needed, Jesus would provide for it. And I think that's something that we get lost in today, is we focus too much on what we want. Granted, you have, like, it's nice to have a house. It's nice to have a family. It's nice to be able to pay bills and whatnot. And that's something that we need to do as people, you know, to contribute to society. But there's stuff that you can set aside, right? And focus more on going to church, spending that time in church, spending that time around people in church, inviting them out, doing Bible studies, you know, going out and talking to people about the Word of God. That's the kind of thing that you can still work all of that in and have God's will inside of your own will, right? Make them one and the same. Whatever God's calling you to do it while you're spreading his word. And that's something that I think this world desperately needs. And so if I'm talking about this and you're like, man, I don't do anything, or there's something that's been eating at you that you're like, I feel like that's what God calls me to do it, man. You only get one life. We only have one go around on this planet. And when you die, if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to live forever anyway, right? Our time in this body is so minuscule compared to our everlasting life when we go back with the Father. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button to follow on with more content. But God bless every single one of you guys, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.